So welcome to today's interview. As you know, we do a weekly series on career intelligence for cybersecurity professionals or people who are looking to get into the field. And this afternoon, I'm really excited to have a special guest, Richard Stiennon. He is principal analyst with IT Harvest based up in Michigan. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Professor Scholl. Glad to be here.
So Richard is a unique person. He has a very long and distinguished background in the security vendor space as an analyst and practitioner. And so today what we're going to be talking about is what are the opportunities for people in cybersecurity who want to go work for a vendor as opposed to an end user. And to kick this off, Richard recently published a book called the Security Yearbook, Security Yearbook 2020. It's a in-depth analysis of the entire security vendor industry. And not only that, it has some very interesting profiles of some of the key people that built the industry up over the last 20 years or so. So, Richard, I wanted to ask what is happening in the vendor space? Let's say you're a new graduate, you're trying to get into the security industry, find a foothold. What sort of opportunities do you see in the vendor space these days?
Yeah, I agree with you that the opportunities in the vendor space are under talked about, right? People think that you have to go right into being a practitioner, so you go to a big bank and start at the bottom and work your way up. But I personally find being at a vendor is more exciting, right? Because the team is building a product and getting it out there, and they're solving the world's problems because it is security. And I've always had fun working at vendors there, and ultimately there's a bigger upside too, because if the vendor does really well, depending on, there's a difference between joining Cisco and joining a startup with 30 employees that's growing rapidly, because they'll eventually get acquired or go public. And you actually, early in your career with a vendor, you can have quite a windfall. And I know plenty of people who drive BMWs because of that, but most of them, that's the size of the windfall, right? A BMW is worth not much more. But there's also a trend to move from vendor to vendor, expanding your roles and taking more senior roles until you're, no matter what role you've taken, you're the top person in the next vendor, or you start your own eventually, or get venture funding. So it's an exciting approach to it. Now, the other advantage is at a vendor, you can see more of the attacks that go on out there. If you're if you went to work for Mandiant FireEye, right, you would be involved in all of the major attacks, and you would be doing the forensics possibly, or if you're from the communication side, you'd be creating the communication response for the customers, and you get to basically get exposed to a lot. I've looked at intensely all last year, I looked at the so-called cyber skills gap, and we've all seen the reports that say there are 2 million jobs going unfilled in the world, and maybe 500,000 here in the United States. But then I also talked to classes. I'll lecture at Utica or at a local community college here, and people are having trouble getting those entry-level positions. So I spent all last year working with a private equity company who wanted to tap into that need. And I finally came to the conclusion that the 2 million openings that are going unfilled are evenly distributed across 1 million companies. So every company is complaining they can't fill their roles, but they only have 2. It's not like in coding, where a big bank might have 6,000 developers working on their code. And so they need to hire at least 600 a year to keep, filling the bottom rungs. In security, it's not like that at all. There's when they do have entry-level positions, it's 1 a year, and they hire somebody out of school, and hopefully with the credentials, and certainly a master's in cybersecurity would be a great door opener there. And then with the knowledge that they're going to train them on the job and train them in their tools train them in their customer needs, put them in front of the customer or in some other role. They could be working with a development team that's producing the product. They could be developing use cases and working on usability of the graphical interface. So a whole gamut of skills that are needed, but it puts you in the security space. And quite often there's a revolving door between vendors and practitioners. So it's not unusual for a CISO to get burned out as they do with because it's a thankless task being a CISO. But they'll be hired as an evangelist for a particular vendor. There's also a route from government agency CISOs into the vendor space as well. And quite often it'll go the other way. An SE for a particular product is, might be, the vendor might like that SE or sales support engineer so much that they make him or her an offer to come in and manage the same product, but as a full-time employee. So great part of the ecosystem that's really important to be aware of when you're getting a degree and when you're graduating.
Yeah, I think that's highlights a lot of the different career paths that could involve vendors. It could involve, you could stay in that space, you can switch back and forth. So that's a really good analysis. So I think in your book you talk about 2,000 plus security vendors. I think that was worldwide. So
right.
Do you have any kind of summary of what's going on in that space now? Or, I mean, we know there are new startups, maybe there's a hiccup in the past couple of months, but do you see drastic consolidation? Are we going to have 10 major security vendors? What's in your crystal ball for the next, let's say 12 months or so in this field?
Yeah, there will never be any consolidation whatsoever until the bad guys give up and go home. So there's acquisitions all the time, but that's just the way a large vendor fills in holes in their products. Or sometimes in their region. So it's possible, though rarely happens, for an antivirus vendor, could acquire an antivirus vendor in Europe in order to have more worldwide exposure. That would be consolidation if it were going on, but that never happens. So these antivirus vendors going, hey, these guys who sell big honking appliances for firewalls, they get all the fun. Let's do that. And they make the mistake of trying to get into that. So the last time I compiled a list of all these vendors, there were only about 1,200 vendors. That was in 2016. Now we're at 2,336 vendors. And of course, I've found about 100 new ones since this book went to press. So there's continuous growth. Every time a high-tech startup gets acquired, it creates millionaires who are probably young, and they go off and start the next big thing, which could be just, a better version of what they created the first time, but they couldn't change in the middle of their run. So they've got more ideas, and off they go and do it again. That's one story that's repeated over and over. You have all these serial entrepreneurs. Nir Zook, the founder of Palo Alto Networks, was also at NetScreen and Checkpoint before that. Jay Chaudhry, I think he's into Zscaler is his 6th startup, and now it's gone public and is doing extremely well and growing rapidly. So the story that I tell like investors is, look at this space is growing at 24% a year. Security spending is growing that fast. So if you're looking at buying the stock of a publicly traded company and they're reporting 12% year over year growth, that's horrible. It's much, much better than ExxonMobil, but that means that they're losing share to somebody because the market itself is growing at twice that rate. So definitely a good time to get into security.
I think the message I heard is because threats are constantly changing, you're going to need new solutions and you're going to need new vendors. And so I think that's kind of good news for people who want to be interested, who want to go into the vendor space. So my last question is, in your book, you profile like 16 vendor categories, which is, I thought, a very good analysis. Do any come to mind as being more or hotter than others, given what's going on with this pandemic, which is, nobody thinks it's totally going away in the next couple of months? Are there certain classes of security vendors that might sort of come to the forefront maybe in the next year or so amongst your categories?
Absolutely. I'd already started following and trying to figure out what was going on in the vendors that have products that sometimes are classified as zero trust, but they're basically products that enforce the security of connections between identities, people, no matter what device they're on, and the applications they want to use. And so there's no network stuff involved in enforcing that. That's called zero trust. So the identity players are seeing a new life. There's about 322 vendors already that are doing something in identity. That's because there's so many biometric devices out there. There's one vendor for each, for all the fingerprint types of things and the voice things and all the rest. But the ones who are consolidating that and making a middleware for identity are doing extremely well. Ping and Okta are examples. And then on the actual network security side, there's something Gartner calls Secure Access Service Edge. And that's really just a big proxy cloud. It's almost like a content delivery network. The vendor has to build data centers all around the world. People can do a tunnel over SSL into that data center, and then they're securely transported wherever they go, and all the filters are applied to their traffic. Those guys are killing it. Zscaler is one example of that. They're hiring like mad. There's one that's moved to New England called Perimeter 81. It's an Israeli startup, but they settled in New England somewhere, probably Boston, I don't know. Another area is security analytics. So those are the guys that think about how do you gather all this alert data and make sense out of it. And usually with some sort of graph database is the hot new tool for doing just that. There's endpoint detection and response. So those battles, are 3 years old now, but there's still some interesting players that are doing well. Cybersecurity is headquartered in Boston, also an Israeli startup. It just goes on and on. There's so many cool things going on. I still like the threat intelligence space, which is growing rapidly. They went from 26 vendors to 71 in just 3 years. So there's lots of different ways to slice and dice threat intelligence. And those people, if you're into the sort of things they do, so this is almost like a great job for somebody who likes to be a hacker, because you impersonate a cyber criminal and you wheedle your way into the forums where people are buying and selling credit cards. And then you maintain your persona there, but you also tie it into your machine system that sucks all of the conversations out of it, so that then they can turn around and sell to banks information. If there's credit cards are being sold on these forums, then they know that they've been breached. And then there's very cool stuff going on in deception. And deception is where you basically plant honeypots throughout a corporate network and trick the attackers into attacking the honeypots. And they can't do any damage there, but you can learn a lot from the tools and methodologies that they're using. So lots of cool stuff going on.
Lots of cool stuff. That's so cool. This has been a really great conversation. I know if people want to dig down into the industry, they can get your book and look at that. Do you publish anything on your website, IT Harvest, or what if people want to, do you publish anything that's in the public domain that students or other prospective professionals could access?
Yeah, you can certainly see my columns at Forbes.com. I think it's called the Cyber Domain, but you just search on my name there and you'll find it. I usually repost those to itharvest.com 5 days after they go live on Forbes. Follow me on LinkedIn or connect to me directly on LinkedIn, and then because I write there as well. So yeah, and then keep your eye open for all my new books. I've got I actually collated all of my Forbes columns into a book. 440 pages covering 10 years of things I've written. They're all dated, no question, but it's interesting to get a historical perspective as well.
That's super cool. So thank you so much for for being and spending some time with us and sharing all your knowledge of the industry. I really appreciate it. Hopefully I can have you back again next year. The industry is not going to be the same as it is today.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
thank you all for watching and listening, and have a great afternoon, and stay safe.